The topic for tonight, the topic of discussion, is vocation and the artist of faith. And our task tonight is to try to sort out what it means to be someone who is rigorously engaged in the Christian faith in such a way that it makes claims on every part of life, while at the same time being rigorously engaged, deeply engaged in the discipline of art making. And that has caused a lot of difficulty, I think, for a number of reasons, one of which might be the power of art making, what a difficult and powerful thing it can be, as is the Christian faith. And to work deeply in both of those can be difficult. And it seems that perhaps one reason that Christian artists struggle with this so much is that we have flimsy ideas of what it means to engage both of those fully, full-bodied, full mind. And the panelists that are here tonight are going to try to help sort out this question. And I'm going to do my best to just get out of the way and open up a conversation in which we can articulate a more robust way of thinking about this relationship between faith and the vocation of art making. To my immediate left is Dr. Rachel Hostetter Smith. She's the Gilkison Chair of Art History at Taylor University in Indiana. She's a member of the Board of Trustees for Christians in the Visual Arts, hereafter referred to simply as SIVA, for which she is also currently serving as the chair of the Publications Committee. Her scholarly work has focused on medieval and Renaissance art, Christian art and architecture, film, and on several contemporary issues in art. She has authored numerous articles and reviews appearing in significant publications, including Renaissance Quarterly, Explorations in Renaissance Culture, Christian Scholars Review, Mars Hill Review, and many others. She has had the opportunity to work as a visiting scholar in wide-ranging places, such as the American Academy in Rome, Taylor University's program in Orvieto, Italy, at Regent College in Vancouver, and several others. She has participated in several major symposia, like this one aspires to be, including at the Historical Society at Boston University, the Council for Christian Scholarly Societies, and the South Central Renaissance Conference in Kansas City. She's a recipient of numerous prestigious awards, and I could continue on and on. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. To her left is Roger Feldman. He's a practicing artist whose work has been exhibited internationally. His large installations require viewers to be aware of their own bodily positions, their bodily experience of a particular place. As an artist, he has received numerous grants and awards, including an individual artist grant from the National Endowment for the Arts in Sculpture and the Prescott Award for Sculpture from SIVA. His work has been featured in numerous publications, including LA Weekly, the Los Angeles Times, Image Journal, and Mars Hill Review. Roger has also worked as a graphic designer for clients, such as Microsoft, Boeing, Northwest Hospital, the American Cancer Society, Harbor View Medical Center. And on top of all of this, Roger is currently the chair of the art department at Seattle Pacific University, where he's been teaching since 2000. He's well known and well loved around here because prior to moving to Seattle, he worked as a professor in the Biola art department for several years. Yeah. By the way, these are my bios. They're not pumping up themselves. Sometimes they hand the guy a bio to read. They're too modest, so I've elaborated. Roger, it's a pleasure to have you here. Not elaborated falsely. It's all true. To his left is Dr. Daniel Seidel. He's a professor of modern and contemporary art history, theory, and criticism at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Prior to this position, he spent over 10 years as curator of the Sheldon Art Gallery at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. His scholarly work has focused on the history and development of art criticism and the relationship between religion and contemporary art. He is the author of numerous essays on art criticism, contemporary art, and museum pedagogy, published in the Journal of Aesthetic Education, Art Criticism, Journal of Modern Literature, and several others. And his valuable reviews and critiques appear in Books and Culture, Art US, Christian Scholars Review, and on Baker's Academics' always fascinating website, The Church and Postmodern Culture. Dr. Seidel edited the book, Weldon Keys and the Arts at Mid-Century. He has been the primary contributor to 2 books on the work of contemporary artist Enrique Martinez Celaya, and he has a forthcoming book entitled God in the Gallery, A Christian Embrace of Modern Art, which is part of the Cultural Exegesis series headed up by Bill Dernis. And that book will be available in October. He's participated in numerous symposia on this subject, including those at the College Art Association annual conference, Calvin College, Azusa Pacific, Notre Dame, Wheaton, Fuller Seminary, and several more. And we're certainly thrilled to have you here with us this weekend. So we'll just dive right in here. Since our topic tonight is vocation and the artist of faith, I want to start by talking about vocation. What do we mean by that? How do we think about that? I think the concept of vocation is larger than the concept of occupation. Occupation seems to speak of one's profession, the work, the skills, the crafts by which we earn a living, by which we sort of occupy our time, do our work. Vocation, however, seems to add to this a sense of calling, a sense of drive, a sense of purpose behind what you're doing, behind the work that you're doing, a desire towards discovery or contribution, or to in some way affect change in the culture. First, I want you to describe your own occupational development. What have you done? I listed a great number of some of those things, but your development, what is the work that you have done? Because I think it may be helpful to many of the people sitting here. But on top of that, how has vocation, how do you currently think about your vocation within that as something that is linked to, but perhaps somewhat distinct from the daily operations? And we'll keep this organic. Feel free to speak when you like. Perhaps we'll start with Rachel.
Not so organic here. Okay.
It's very organic.
All right.
I'm just forcing it.
Somehow we have to start this process. Okay. Well, I think it does help to know a little bit about who you're listening to, so that you have a little bit more context. And when you listen to somebody read your bio, you kind of say, why did they pick that? You know, at times to mention, or, oh yeah, I did do that. You know, it's hard to piece together at times a sense of the journey that you've been on. And for me, that's really what I would have to describe the development of my sense of vocation and how that relates, in a sense, to occupation. Because while art has always been, from the time I was very, very young, at kind of the center of my consciousness of what I needed to give myself to, exactly what that meant, what form that would take, was very much in question. And so while I studied art history, I got my degree in art history in my undergrad, I actually began work, and this was left out of my bio, here at Biola. I worked as a graphic designer on the publication staff here. What would be, I don't know what the office is called, promotional staff. So even though I started rooted in art history and interpretation of art, I actually began my actual practice in a highly kind of pragmatic field. And over time, that evolved into working in book publishing, and then a return to art history, as I found that the need to really engage with the interpretation of art. What does art mean? What does it actually do? What does it contribute? Was really at the heart of what I needed to be engaged with. And I would refer to it truly as a kind of need. Something was missing in what I was doing. And I think that has very much to do with the kind of pathway to finding vocation as opposed to occupation. Is somehow, as you begin to get a bead on what your vocation is, it touches something that is very central to who you are. And there is that sense that you must do it, even though you don't quite know how to define what that may be. So I returned to graduate school, did my doctorate, and then began to teach at Ohio University. I taught at Ohio University in an interdisciplinary arts program that combined music, philosophy, aesthetics primarily, theater, and the visual arts. And I was the art historian. But that was also an important piece of my vocational journey, because the breadth and the interconnectedness of things that program engaged me with, I found was very much, again, at the center of who I was. It fit, it worked, looking for things that tied things together in a meaningful way. Was of tremendous significance to me. And so some of these things that in a sense might be seen as serendipitous actually helped me to begin to identify that sense of genuine vocation. What is it that I in particular need to be doing or feel is my particular contribution to make? With that, and then moving to Taylor in terms of the kind of occupational journey, I think where I've arrived in terms of a sense of vocation, which I would define as that for which you are particularly well suited. And exactly how you do that, how you fit that together or know that, is sometimes hard to pin together. I would say that my sense of vocation is to be a facilitator of the engagement with what art has to contribution to a broad audience. That is what I really love to do, and that is what I like to try to bring about, is to engage a broad audience of people with what art in particular has to contribute to human being and to human society. As an art historian, come critic, kind of wandering in between those two kinds of roles, that involves interpretation, but it also involves engaging with a wide diversity of issues in order to see what kind of art and what kinds of things can really contribute meaningfully to different audiences.
Which is, just to clarify, the kind of vocation as someone of faith, as an art historian, theorist, that you see your vocation as contributing to culture in general.
Yeah.
Broad culture.
Broad culture, yeah. Very, very definitely a piece of that is certainly specifically to the Christian community, but not at all exclusively to that. Mm-hmm. Much more broadly, yeah.
Very good.
Okay, well, I guess I'll jump in here. After high school, I knew I wanted to be an art person, and headed to the University of Washington, where I did my undergraduate degree in art. But during that time, and actually prior to going, I had a conviction that I wanted to find out more about being a Christian. I also was kind of weird because in high school, started to study Buddhism and Shinto and other Eastern religions, which was, looking back, kind of odd, but interesting, very interesting. And I also was interested in the brain, and so I started reading books on the brain, and it wasn't for a class. It was pretty cool. Yeah, sorry.
That's right.
So by the time I got to university, I also started working in a parachurch organization called Young Life, and did that for 4 years while at university. So there was this contrast between working in Young Life and attending a church and going to the art department, which was quite large and into all kinds of spiritual territory as well as making art. And I found that contrast to just be uncomfortable. And I got a lot of strokes for being in working with high school kids and thinking, well, maybe that's a good direction to go. So to me, I wasn't convinced that art was a vocation at that point in time. So I went to seminary after college. And I went to Fuller Seminary. So I moved from Washington State down to Pasadena and attended there. The interesting thing is two little events that really were formative for me. One was that first night we had of all the incoming people, we had a communion service. And it was a long table, and there must have been at least 100 people. And we had, I think, dessert, and we were sitting across from each other. And the first night then, I sat across from this person, and we just started talking, and it turns out that he was an artist trying to figure out what to do with theology. And you know, the chances of, and to our knowledge, we were the only two that even had art interest. And so that was pretty unusual. So we met regularly throughout that year. Another event is that in my classes, it was an interesting time where the seminary was trying to be hep. So they started saying that in addition to writing papers and taking exams, you could make a piece of sculpture or do a painting or, you know, poetry as a way of knowing, as a way of processing what you're learning. So I said, sign me up. And so that's what I did. I started making paintings as well as doing the homework and writing papers. And that was pretty important looking back. So I think I did the first installation on Fuller Theological Seminary campus. Truly, I think I was probably the first person to do something like that. And the other significant part about that year was that somebody took me out to Claremont to meet a friend of theirs who was in the program, who also had a similar faith experience and was doing this contemporary art. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I mean, I got to go to her opening for her MFA show, and I was mesmerized. And one other little thing during that year was that the Norton Simon Museum had just opened. And I remember distinctly going in there and having an art background and contemporary art background by that time, but standing in front of a Larry Poons color-field, brilliant green with these little red ellipses, and the whole thing flickered. And I was amazed by that. So I stored all those things, but to make it short, one of the professors recommended that I meet a gentleman on my way back to Seattle to work for the summer named Bill Dearness, who was teaching in Portland. So bottom line is that we decided, I was not convinced that seminary and that direction was for me at the end of that year. I did well academically, but my heart wasn't in it. But I was really interested in this painting stuff. That was really starting to grab hold. So I we decided not to go back. And I stayed in Seattle, and I decided to go off the deep end and try moving toward art. So I basically went to the public library and got every art book I could, well, not every, but I mean, I started reading and reintroducing myself to things that I had heard about in college, and took it very seriously, got a studio, started painting, and worked, so vocationally I worked at a pizza parlor, and that led to eventually working in a lighting fixture factory on a table saw and using power equipment, which actually feeds into what I do now, and I didn't know it at the time. I also worked for my father-in-law, who was a contractor, and he taught me a whole bunch of skills that I still use today. And this was all part of that process. Well, 2 years later, after taking a course from Hans Ruckmacher at Regent College, that gave me purpose. I could see now that there was this field and this intersection between Christianity and art that was serious, and that I could see myself in that. So that gave me purpose, and I applied to graduate school and eventually went to Claremont. And so that was the beginning. But I had to bounce around a little bit. And I think that most 20-year-olds plus have to do some bouncing to find it. Some people are very fortunate and know from day one that this is the direction. But that wasn't my situation. So that's how I kind of started moving in this direction.
You're going to follow up with a question to him? You're going to clarify? Have him delay more for me?
Pass.
Okay. I'm terrified. I've been thinking for months about what I would say this evening, and now I don't know exactly where to start or how to start. I have this feeling that I need to give my testimony, and my experience of giving my testimony is that I would, as a kid, I would make up my spiritual birthday. I come up with a story that my brother was sick, and I went out in the backyard. No, this is serious. I actually prayed this prayer, or I actually told my Sunday school teacher this, that my brother was sick, and I went out in the backyard and I prayed and I asked Jesus into my heart. And so I could say, you know, I could talk about my journey from that perspective, I suppose, and I don't know how honest it would be. I feel that my vocation is to try to figure out who I am and what I'm doing here and what I should be doing and how I should be glorifying God and extending the reign of Christ in this world in a priestly way. I mean, I understand vocation as in the sense that we are created to be priests in the temple that God has created, which is this world, this cosmos. And so my sense of vocation has to do with my various other vocations, like being a father and a husband and a son and a friend and a teacher. And all of those vocations push and shape and offer tension to what I do to draw a paycheck. And what I do to draw a paycheck is talk a lot about art. And for a long time, I put up exhibitions. And I think ultimately, I would like to say that I do it all for other people, that I'm doing it for the students and I'm doing it for the audience. But I do it for myself. I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to gain clarity in this world. And I think art and thinking about art is a profound place to gain clarity. And it's the place that I've chosen to spend most of my time and energy thinking about. and reading about, and then writing about it, and then trying to communicate that to other people. I grew up in a Christian home, but I never went to a Christian school, and so I never really learned to think about things in the Christian way, the Christian perspective on this or that, or how to think about my vocation within the context of my Christianity. It just dawned on me when I was finishing my PhD dissertation that, lo and behold, Francis Schaeffer didn't know anything about modern art, or at least to my mind. He didn't know anything about modern art, and why was that? And I felt that I needed to bring unity and consistency to my thinking. I wanted to be able to think and behave and to function in the same way Monday through Saturday as I was doing on Sunday, and to think about my work all as a piece. And so the idea of having a vocation, or how faith interacts with vocation, for me ultimately, my goal is to dissolve it so that it's simply the work that I do, and so it's completely unified, and so that I'm not a different person around my wife, or I'm not a different person around my children, I'm not a different person around my parents, or around my students, or around artists, that I can be the same person and function in the same way. And so I attempt to put together some kind of peculiar, strange hybrid of Christian perspective, I suppose, that my reading and thinking from a certain Christian perspective nourishes how I look at work, and so that I can offer certain kinds of insights that are helpful to the artist, and helpful to me. And my view and my goal has been to simply produce interesting and compelling, imaginative interpretations of artwork. That's it, plain and simple. Whether the artist is a Christian, or the work is Christian, or that my view is a Christian perspective, I want to get to the point where that can't be separated. And I would say that I'm 41 years old, and I feel like I'm back where I was when I was 29, finishing my dissertation, and I just continue to sort out those questions in a different way, and they keep getting posed in a different way. And I can't imagine, I don't think I've gone a day without thinking about my vocation, and how I fit and don't fit, and how whether I'll get fired from my job, my teaching job, when they actually find out that my university has been giving funding for a book that's coming out that's going to deal explicitly with Christianity from a Christian perspective. And I find that terrifying. I find it interesting and compelling. I find it pretty exciting that I could get away with something like that. That I don't have to go off to a Christian college, nourished in a Christian worldview environment, with funding to be able to produce a book like that. But that I can do it. I can do it while I'm functioning in a place that one might think would be, at least if not inhospitable, providing certain enough apathy to frustrate such endeavor. And my goal has been to be able to produce explicitly Christian work for an explicitly Christian audience, while at the same time hoping that those that aren't in that audience, artists and writers, find it interesting and find the arguments that I make compelling and worth reading. And that, for me, is ultimately my vocational goal: to write things that interest me and that achieve some kind of clarity in my life. And I'm hoping, and my my desire is that if that's the case, if that brings some kind of clarity for me, it's going to do that for somebody else who picks up my book or reads something that I've written on some blog or something of that nature that could help them and gain some sort of help them and as they are gaining some kind of clarity. So,
yeah.
No follow-up. I won't take follow-up.
Yeah. Well, Rookmacher was mentioned, and one of the great things that Rookmacher said was that he said that Christ did not come here. The incarnation is not about making us Christians, but about making us fully human, making us human. And perhaps that points to this idea of a full-bodied, honest engagement with the meaning of who we are as people, the meaning of the world. It's not this segmented sort of thought ghetto. Why do you think that this has been such a difficulty for an indeterminate amount of time? Certainly the 20th century Christians have really struggled with this idea of it being okay to think about Christianity as being about being fully human. And in what ways does this open up a different way of engaging with the arts? I think Dan very much touched on that, but perhaps we can elaborate that. Why do you think that's been a problem, and how does it change the way that we engage?
I think I've observed and have lived out this tension for this tension between choosing an art form that is very cold and calculating and based on visual kinesthetic and oral perception, and I'm attracted to that as a human being. I love it. The flip side is having a very rich internal life, spiritual life, and they're not in the same realm. They're different, and yet over time I've been able to feel like they're starting to become overlapped in one. And so this dichotomy, this split, I think is based on a couple of things. I think if you really own the reality of the gospel, there's a sense of obligation out of sincere response, wanting to respond and respond through the voice of your artwork, whatever that is, because you're grateful, and there's this just a genuine desire to have that be your voice. And so there's a sense of guilt if you don't sometimes. And just because you feel like it's second rate, perhaps. So doing a color study is not as important as doing something that has narrative content. And there's that inner conflict of trying to reconcile those two. And so I have felt that tension of feeling like I should be thinking about something spiritual here because that's who I really am, but the form is not about that, and yet I want to kind of force that square peg into a round hole. And I think over time I've come to realize that, no, it's really a broader realization that part of being human is just being interested in life and things and whatever you are, however you're wired, it's okay. you were made that way, and it's okay, and pursue those things. Of course, there are choices that we all make about what's appropriate and what's not, and what's really you or not, and so forth. But I think it frees the individual to pursue just about any subject matter, as a human being, created in the image of God, and it's okay.
I think there are several things that have contributed to the difficulty that Christians have had, especially Protestant Christians, with approaching the arts and recognizing what they have to contribute. And I would just put out there several tensions that have existed down through the history of the church, actually, from the earliest days, in how things were understood. The one is the relationship between the secular and the sacred. What does that mean? And the question of, is there really a distinction? Because secular actually simply refers to the things of this temporal life. And so if there's going to be a dichotomy, a kind of separation between those two things, then you have to somehow say that the things of the life that we live in the here and now somehow is not as important as the life that is to come. So I think the way in which people in the church and various groups have come to understand the relationship between sacred and secular, and how that causes us to engage different aspects of human life and living in the world is kind of an essential issue, and how they resolve those relationships. Related to that would be what actually arose very, very early, what's often referred to as the Gnostic Heresy, and that is the tension between the material and the spiritual that is connected to this question of sacred and secular. Do you see the material as somehow less important, less significant, or did God make us whole, and did God make the world whole, material and spiritual? And so that has often kind of diminished the things that we engage in this world. And what Roger was saying, if it doesn't seem to fit this category of spiritual in the way that we conventionally refer to it, somehow it's not as significant. And his work that deals very much with your sense of place and orientation physically in the world, somehow then isn't as important. But I think from a theological perspective, those two things are whole. And I think we're all kind of touching on this question of wholeness, seeing the interconnectedness of things. And I think the third thing I would kind of throw out there that's been a contributor to this issue would be the balance between a creational perspective and a redemptive perspective, again, theologically. The good of the original creation that still exists in all of it, in some measure, in every piece, but also the reality that some sort of restoration and redemption is needed. And where you balance those two things really shifts how you think about, again, the things of this world and what to really give your time and attention and your energy to, and how that's going to be assessed, or whether it is all of a piece, in a sense, and finding your particular role within that big tapestry of what we're actually engaged in, your particular thread to follow, is a different way of orienting yourself.
I think that we, along the same train of thought that we've been following here, I think that because we tend to segment religious thought from the rest of life, that perhaps when we approach the arts, we treat the arts as though they're supposed to illustrate the faith. That this faith, how do I put these together? Well, here's the faith, and I need the art to follow in line, to be a representation and illustration of this. In what ways have you found in your own vocation the influence actually moving in the other direction? In what way do the arts influence and change and alter your faith, nurture, nourish your faith?
One thing that you brought up that I thought was interesting, one of the weaknesses that I have felt from a Christian worldview perspective, is that it threatens to make the work of art a visual illustration of a philosophy. So one comes to a work of art, say one comes to a painting, already armed with a hermetically sealed confessional worldview that then gets applied to that work of art, or it sees that work as a visual illustration of that philosophy. And so the focal point is the philosophy of the worldview. The painting or the work of art becomes simply an illustration to make that philosophical point. I noticed this in museum work. A curator friend of mine said that the problem with wall labels is that people read them. And that you end up, you create an exhibition with wall label after wall label, and viewers will read the wall label and then look at the work of art as a visual illustration of what's already been read. And so the painting or the sculpture becomes kind of a cherry on top. It becomes decorative. It gives visual imagery to what's already been thought out. And I have found, I mean, if say in the monastic traditions, going out and working, making food, doing labor was intended to be a spiritual exercise that actually nourished the faith of the religious, then I would imagine if art is the actual practice, you're actually working, that gessoing your canvas or spending time in your studio staring at a painting, or working in your study trying to figure out how to introduce an 800-word review when you've got a deadline in, 2 weeks or something, that in itself should be an activity that shapes and molds your spiritual formation. And so I would say that there would have to be some aspect in which artistic practice is shaping the faith, or the artwork is going to look like a visual illustration. It's going to look like an attempt to send messages, to send communiques out into the world, in which does, I think, violence to the uniqueness and the distinctiveness of what a work of art is, and the fact that it doesn't do that. It can't do that. And if it does, it's not a really good work of, it's not a good work of art. And so I think that, so I think that degree of pushback in which that spiritual exercise, whatever it is, washing floors or painting on a canvas or writing, there has to be a situation in which it's open enough, one's faith is open enough to be able to be nourished and shaped and formed in some way. And I don't see that as, to think about that as radical and problematic seems to me to wipe out centuries of the monastic tradition in which it was simply assumed that you did work, and that work was something that shaped and molded you in some specific way, even while you weren't studying or praying or in a specific prayer of the hours.
One of the words I latched on to there was the kind of illustrating the faith as a way of doing violence to visual art making. And that seems to imply a lack of charity, a lack of honesty, a lack of depth, to do violence to the language for the sake of communicating a message is an interesting idea.
Yeah, I have my experience. I'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow. So things that I say tonight, I don't want you still need to come tomorrow to listen to that.
Yeah.
That's the real stuff that we'll really get into. But I have this experience that that artists that I've worked with, the work that they produce, artists that are not churched, artists of no explicit faith, of nothing that's recognizable as a religious faith, make work that open up this transcendent world for me, that I see as painting this porosity of being, that all of a sudden I see a ladder and I see angels going up and down, and I see, oh, this world, this artist sees this. It's like Salieri looking at, reading Mozart's music in Amadeus, and he's infuriated that this little impetuous child is creating this work that just opens up the heavens for him. And then I'll look at work that is seen from an explicitly Christian perspective, and I have to admit that the air is heavy and humid with this hermetically sealed, completely immanent world in which messages are sent. And the message is Christianity, but the message could well be democratic politics, or it could be a Republican right-wing politics. It could be whatever message that's going to be sent out. It just happens to be that that message that's sent out in this eminent world is a Christian one, or one in which somebody is sending out a religious message. And I don't know exactly how to deal with that, but I get that sense that that this Christian artist is operating in a world that is hermetically sealed off from the transcendent, while this unchurched artist of no faith is making work that opens up the world, and despite what the artist says, reveals that there is incredible porosity, that there is something beyond and transcendent, and it's here, and opens up that doorway. And I don't know, I'm struggling to try to figure out how to deal with that and to find the tools to be able to accommodate that. Wittgenstein once said that I'm not a religious person, but everything I do or everything I think about comes from a religious point of view. And there's something significant in that. And I would want the evangelical Christian community to be able to develop a framework in which that can be brought out, and the sensitivity to that aspect, that that making work that is transcendent may not be simply the domain of confessional evangelical Christians.
To add to that, I think propaganda is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really tough to get beyond the obvious to something deeper. And it's just not appropriate. I mean, the forms of visual propaganda. I mean, let's Hartfield, for example. His form of propaganda was anti-Nazi, and he sent postcards to the Nazis, and he suffered for it. This whole field of propaganda is very interesting. I just don't think that something so valuable should be reduced to visual attempts. However, I think developmentally, most artists of faith go through a phase or some time where they have to work that through. And the only way to do it is to do it, and then burn it, or something. And yet, I think it's something that it's evidence of trying to work it through, of trying to reconcile these two worlds.
I guess I'm going to focus back on a little bit on the question of, how does art making or art, how has it informed your faith? And I guess I'm going at it a little bit differently, but maybe a little bit connected with what Dan introduced in his initial testimony, as he put it. That what I've found is that art making, and I would include writing in that. I have a background not just as a graphic designer, but also working in fiber and construction. works, and then also then moving into art history and writing, and each of those are an art form. And what I've found is that art is a way of knowing, it's a way of being. We've all, learned about Jackson Pollock, and that for him, it was kind of the ultimate assertion of being, but there's something very, very essential, in that. You're present when you're making something in a way that I think you seldom are in other kinds of activities. And it's also a way of seeking. It's a way of coming to know, coming to understand, or at least moving through that process. And engaging art can do the same thing. I think it's not just the making, but also the engaging of it can bring people into each of those processes. And that's why I think it is so powerful and so essential to human beings when they actually connect with art in that profound and particular way. And for me, with my faith, that has truly informed a sense of coming to understand something about being very present in the world. And because that's what happens when you're making art. You are present in a way that you are not in most other situations.
In what way do we engage in theological thinking that is rigorous, that is well-informed? In what way do we allow that to frame how we engage the arts, whether it's through writing or through making or through looking? If on the one hand it's not enough to just kind of use it as though it's the wall statement and filter everything through it, or try to operate as messages, needs to be the communication of an explicit message. Well, then how do we use it to frame what we do? How does it give structure to what we do? I know that's a really open question. But.
Yeah, I think you get into certain institutional locations. In my observation, I have my general view is that much of what passes for art criticism out there, just in general, is boring. It's impenetrable. It's just not of interest. And I think that there's a tremendous potential for people, for writers with real sensitivity, who really are excited about penetrating into the work of art and having the work on them. I think there's a tremendous need for that, and I think Christians who are Christian intellectuals who are nourished in a tradition of thinking have a tremendous opportunity. Simply the categories of thought, the language and vocabulary that can create writing that would be interesting, imaginative, that could be a breath of fresh air in a contemporary, arid contemporary art world. But I also think that much of what has been written about art from a Christian perspective has been written by philosophers and theologians, and there's a certain perception that Christianity in that context, working that out, needs to be left to the professionals. And that's a problem. That's a problem because I don't think there's enough of a sensitivity to the particularity of artistic practice and what art is taking place, so that you have a theologian from whatever confessional perspective who has the confessional perspective as the framework, and that confessional framework is going to be the focus of the work. I I don't know how I would be able to categorize my confessional framework and what that might mean. And it took me a long time. I put on various suits of clothes. I put on a reformed worldview suit, and I tried it on, and I tried to think and work from this reformed neo-Kuyperian perspective, and it didn't feel comfortable to me. And I don't really know what perspective or what sort of confessional approach, say for example the book that's coming out in the fall, what it's going to be. And so I can imagine it being torn to shreds by all kinds of various philosophers and theologians from various seminaries who are interested in aesthetics, who see the framework itself as problematic. But for me, the framework's not important. It's developing a framework that's broad enough and expansive enough to take contemporary art seriously. And I think contemporary art deserves a Christianity that's that broad and that deep. And I don't know. I mean, I think in certain confessional perspectives that can be problematic. In a Reformed confessional perspective, the importance is the Reformed confessional perspective. It's the creational worldview. It's art that celebrates. Well, what do you do with art that doesn't celebrate? What do you do with art that curses? What do you do with art that reveals life to be as black can possibly be? Insert your confessional perspective. That becomes the framework, becomes the important thing. And my experience has been in dealing with these works of art and dealing with artists that my framework has had to mold and shape, and I've had to be forced to let certain things go. And that I may be accused of going down some sort of liberal path, or I'm in some sort of heterodox perspective, but I think it's worth it for engaging in modern contemporary art in a serious way.
And there's a way of showing a great deal of respect to that, to the broader culture, to what's going on in contemporary art, of not looking down on it, but sort of taking more of a posture of humility, that I'm not fully formed, my framework is not fully formed. If I come to it with a fully formed framework, then I'm not going to listen to what it really legitimately has to offer.
Right, and I think in a certain way it has that kind of apologetic function. The apologetic function is the problematic apologetic function is that I'm a Christian and you're not, and we're separated from some chasm, rather than we're both sinners, or we're both seekers, or we're both in a position where we need Christ. And how does that relationship have an impact on me? And so the assumption is that it's not just simply going the other way. What is it that, the idea that as Christians we have all the answers and we just apply those answers to various secular places, nihilistic places, or problematic places in culture to solve the problems, is inherently problematic, because there's not enough sensitivity to what is going on in those various cultural practices and the impact that they may have on us. And I'll talk about it tomorrow, but I truly believe that that contemporary artistic practice can teach evangelical Christians some pretty significant things about the Christian faith. And that is that human beings are created as liturgical and sacramental creatures. And evangelicalism is nothing if not anti-sacramental and anti-liturgical. And artists out there who are not Christians are producing work that is oozing with a sacramental awareness of their humanity and a liturgical awareness of their humanity. And a vast majority of very smart, committed Christian intellectuals are completely blind to it. Because belief is about the mental assent that you give and your ability to avoid non-contradiction in logical argument and your ability to sort out your rational thoughts. And you're not looking at what is taking place in front of you, in which these artists are making work that we as Christians and people of faith should be embracing and seeing as something that we might have some sort of interesting thing to say in response to that. Say, hey, this is a tradition. Did you know there's a 500-year tradition of doing this practice? And you don't have to go to the Eastern religions. You don't have to go to Buddhism. You can actually go to Eastern Christianity. And Eastern Christianity here are these practices, and look at these practices. And look and take a language from Eastern Christianity, for example, and to apply that to creatively apply that to that work to reveal something interesting for that artist, for the artist to have something given back to them, that they see that they're a part of something, or that there's something that they're tapping into that's bigger and wider and deeper than they imagined. I mean, that to me, there is so much potential to approach contemporary art in that way. It amazes me.
Which means approaching as though we've got something, as though you're trying to contribute, not to sort of as a combative opponent.
No, that's right.
Yeah. Anything to offer to that or jump off of that?
Kind of, sort of. I think that, I was been thinking about, I've been in two worlds simultaneously. One as a designer and working professionally in that world. And I see myself as having a foot on the dock and a foot in a rowboat. And you know how it's really precarious, and the boat starts to move away from the dock, and then you're in trouble. And it's always kind of been in this tension between two worlds. But one interesting observation about my own self in this situation is that I don't seem to have the issues in design that I have in fine art. They're different in that as a designer, you're a servant to somebody else's message, and your job is to put together the best combination to achieve graphic resonance so that you can help communicate the message. So your role is really to serve somebody else. But there's a certain freedom in that to find some really good choices and to feel good about it, and to come to that place where we all have this, regardless of what your form is, where you know that's a good design, or that works. And whereas in fine art, there's often this internal dialogue. What is this saying? Am I really, what does this imply? And coming to a realization that there's this tension of feeling maybe good about it and either letting go of a message or understanding that it's actually formulating a message. And there's this action, reaction, response as an artist to try to figure out, is this really, am I there yet? Am I there yet? So it's just an observation.
Rachel, do you have anything to respond?
Well, I was actually thinking about the quote from Kuyper that you brought up as I was listening to Dan's comments. In particular, Christ didn't come to make us Christians, but to make us more human. And I think for me, that's really at the center of my theological or confessional kind of perspective, is that in a sense, because we are human and we are limited by that, there's not something inappropriate about focusing on that, and that means very much focusing on the here and now and what that means for human beings, and what it means to be fully human, and the tremendous complexity and tensions that involves, whether you are a Christian or not. And so I see a seamlessness, quite honestly, between those who are believers and those who are not. Yes, there's a distinction, but there is a continuity still that exists there in terms of the essential struggles with what it means to be human, how we understand the world in which we find ourselves, and how we respond to that as we try to sort that out. And I think what Dan has been raising about what we can see and learn from a great deal of contemporary art, it is especially that art where you see that struggle, not necessarily clear answers or the arrival, but the struggle to try to move through some of those fundamental human issues. In terms of a confessional, this isn't exactly the same, but I've always found myself, I'm not a joiner, so I've struggled even with the concept of denominations, and have wondered what God really thinks about that, even though it's a reality that human beings have to create institutions in order to organize ourselves. I mean, it's just a kind of essential dimension, but where, in a sense, it's necessary to pull back from a pre-existing framework that's been set for you, and to constantly be kind of testing that and adjusting as you come to what you think is a growing understanding of the human being, and the human being in relation to God as a Christian.
Well, I think in some way, sorry to jump in, but I think in some way too that will always lead to a certain amount of discomfort in terms of wherever you're located institutionally. Then that the institution just doesn't provide that mold to shape you into a certain kind of product, so that there's always that sense of being, or I think it's a good thing to be uncomfortable and to not have a certain kind. Of course, I'm just justifying my own discomfort. So,
Amen.
But just not being able to transcend or to cut across certain kinds of institutional, or being willing to cut across certain kinds of institutional limitations that we all face in terms of how cultural organization sees vocation.
An integral part of our theological
in the sense
practice.
of, I would assume that, I mean, for me, Christianity is really unbelievably difficult and problematic, and I'm not quite sure what I'm doing. And so I would assume that that's probably, those are the certain kinds of virtues that we embrace when we pay attention to art. So there's ambiguity everywhere, and there's complexity and ambivalence everywhere.
Distinction between that and art that seeks to obliterate that difficulty.
Another word, and I think both of you have alluded to this, is authenticity. And I think that it implies that things are seamless, that there's not a dichotomy. And Daniel, in your opening remarks, you hinted that you're truly being who you are. And if that aligns with a sense of direction, long-term, because we might start out in a certain direction and then be bounced over through circumstances or whatever, and be doing something else. But what remains seems to be this authentic inner sense that this is okay, this is where I'm heading, and it's me. For example, I mean, the trajectory as young artists especially experience, and we've all experienced this regardless of whether you're an artist or not, is heading in a direction and then realizing, well, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was, or am I that good, or should I keep going? And another, especially now, another important question is, am I willing to pay the price of money, vocationally? Am I willing to walk down this road? Is this really me? And I think that's has been heightened through the economy and difficult financial circumstances that are, it's just different than it was 30 years ago. So authenticity seems to be a stream that continues on. Well, I'd like to reverse the situation. So if a museum asked some Christians or allowed some Christians to come in and do their music there, well, number one, they had to be good enough to even get in the door, and which, you know, I think that's the broader view I would take.
I don't know. I mean, my view, well, my understanding of the church would probably differ, and I would say no. That's part of the the tradition of icon painting, for example. The iconographer was assumed, still is assumed to be a Christian who is fasting and prayerfully engaged in ascetic practices even before they produce the icon. But my rigidity within the context of the church opens up everything outside of it. So my view in regards to the rigidity, say, of iconography, the discipline, the practice of iconography within the context of the church, rigidly and intently applied within the context of the church, lays a foundation to be able to do everything outside. And so one of the concerns I have is just the leakiness, where you're not quite sure what is that church space for. Is it a performance space? God is very happy with those performers, whether they're Christians or not, with the talent that they're using. It doesn't have to take place within the context of the church for that to be for God to listen, or for God to put His blessing on it. And that just, for me, I mean, that's just my own particular understanding of the church, but it moves into certain kinds of blurring issues in terms of Christian art, or Christian artists who are not able to find venues at other places want the church to be a venue for their work. And then the church becomes an institution, becomes a surrogate museum or gallery space. And then I think there are certain cross purposes that are taking place within that context. But I don't
when you said, like, the work of the person not informed by faith,
yeah,
that is porosity.
Yeah.
Are they invited in the church to show that? Should they not?
I don't know. My thought is that if they're on the street corner, that's the porosity is there. That it doesn't delegitimate them for not being in the church. I mean, I have my own. I despise contemporary worship praise stuff. I just do. You know, I like it when I'll listen to it on the radio when I'm driving, and that's fine there. I don't want it in my church. I don't want it in church. It's fine out there. I listen to it. My kids have the CDs and all that stuff. I like it. It's okay, but I don't want it in church. I think there are certain distinctions, and I think what takes place within the context of the church theologically provides an expansive foundation to justify my enjoyment of that music that's outside of it. So I'm not saying that it's not good. I'm not saying that the best music takes place within the context of the church. But I just think there are, yeah, exactly. There are, but I think there can be certain parameters. So cultural practice doesn't have to be legitimated within the context of the church. That, I think, is the ultimate, whatever decisions are made. The church the physical space doesn't have to be in the business of legitimating cultural practice, that it can be legitimated out there.
You value what Wittgenstein can offer, but you don't want him preaching at the church, in the church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He can move me and shape me and mold me, but
he's not your priest.
He's not my priest.
Yeah, and maybe that's an important distinction to make. In what role would that art be brought in? I think to learn from, certainly to engage with it, possibly very productive potentially within the church, but not necessarily. It's hard for me to say absolutely here's the line, because I always have to look at the particulars. You have maybe some general principles that you're operating by, but you can really only know how well they apply when you're dealing with a concrete example. And say, how is this going to really enter into the purposes of worship, for example? What is this going to contribute? And so I would say it really depends on
what they're singing.
What
they're singing.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe I can just clarify, since I brought Gnosticism kind of in as one of the issues, and how you understand the relationship, what I would call, how do you understand the relationship between the material and the spiritual? Are they interconnected, at least for us as human beings, because we are embodied in bodies, and to some extent we're limited by that? Also, certain things are available to us through that. And I think Roger's work is a perfect example. We know certain things through the way we experience them, through our bodies, through our senses, that kind of thing, and that can lead to the spiritual. My raising that issue has more to do with how you understand that issue can either create a tension, a tremendous tension, or it can allow for greater openness to the legitimacy of a range of places to invest yourself.